Hi, I'm Dr. Nadine Wong. Would you like to know the expression of a man? Well, join me on the Now Talk Show. The Now Talk Show is an intimate conversation with men to highlight the pivotal awakening from his past that has brought him from trials into triumph into the now. The Now Talk Show will be sponsored by the Alabaster Wellness Clinic. Please stay tuned. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to another episode of the Now Talk Show. I am your host, Dr. Nadine Wong. The Now Talk Show is a safe platform for men to express themselves, to discuss the trials, how they have overcome into their triumph, and where they are today. And today we have another distinguished gentleman. His bio is so saturated with information, so saturated with expression. And without further ado, I would like you to help me welcome another distinguished gentleman by the name of Ntare Ali Gault, Dr. Ntare Ali Gault. Please welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Thank you so very much for accepting our invitation to be on the Now Talk Show. And normally I ask my guests, tell us who you are, where you're from, but please, your name. There is so much meat and potatoes or fish and chips. I would like, without getting, please explain to me, tell me the history behind your name.
Actually, actually a very interesting history. Back in the '60s, my father was in the civil rights movement, and the Black Power struggle, and he decided that he didn't want any of his children to have colonial names,
Right.
and so my oldest, well, not my oldest, but the oldest of his children, my brother's name was is Haile Nkrumah, which is after Haile Selassie and Kwame Nkrumah, and my
Right.
sister's name is Saida Makiba, after
Mhm.
William Makiba, and was a dancer that he met whose name was Saida, and then I became Ntare Ali. Originally, I was supposed to be Lumumba Ali after Patrice Lumumba, but then my mother couldn't even pronounce it, and she's like, "No." But so he named me after Prince Ntare the Fourth out of
Mm.
Guinea. And then right before I was born, Muhammad Ali refused to be inducted into the draft, and
Yeah.
so he changed it to Ali, and so I became Ntare Ali.
Wow. What was it like growing up? Tell us a bit about your background. So I noticed you're from Buffalo. So
Yes,
give us the
yes.
family history.
Yeah, that was tough growing up with Ntare Ali because it was before everybody started having the African names. Uh,
Okay.
that generally came about like after Roots. So then everybody started doing Kunta and Kizzy and everything like that. But
Mhm.
before that, it was just my brother, sister, and I. I mean, even
Right.
my one brother even teased that when we were growing up, he never wanted to take us outside to play because someone would ask us our names.
Oh no.
He would have to try to explain who we were. So in the hood, which I grew up in the inner city on the east side of Buffalo, no
Okay.
one could pronounce these weird African names. But I went to school in the all white area, and
Oh
so no one
wow.
could pronounce these weird African names in the all white area. So I think I spent about the first 17 years of my life with my
Mhm.
name being mispronounced all the time.
Wow.
And
What is the most awkward pronunciation you've come across?
all of them. Atari was
Uh-huh.
the most popular one after the video game Atari,
Mhm.
and Ntare. So it was mostly Ntare and Atari. And
Okay.
everybody would think that they made a new joke when they would say, "You know that rhymes with Atari?" And it's like, yeah, like 35 years in, yeah, the joke is not new.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us some more about your childhood days.
Well, I'm the youngest of five children, and my mother was a transplant from Mississippi. She originally moved to the Western New York area. She moved into Lackawanna
Mhm.
during her first marriage, and then subsequently her husband was killed, and she met my father a little while later and married my father. My father moved up from South Carolina when he was a teenager, and his situation was that his mother and father had split when he was a little kid, like about 3 years old, and so he was raised by a single father during the
Mm.
Depression. My grandfather actually kept the children, and my grandmother moved. But then, when he was about 14 years old, um, he got into a fight with someone, and with a white teenager, and the his family came and told my grandfather uh, that if my father did not leave the area, not only would he be lynched, but so would the rest of the family.
Oh, wow.
So my father had to move. Like after all these years of living with his father and being raised by his father, he
Mhm.
had to move to Buffalo to live with his mother at 14. So from 3 to 14, he had not lived with his mom, but at 14, he had to move in with her because the whole family was going to be lynched. So uh, that was yeah. So they both had turbulent backgrounds growing up in the Jim Crow South and moving into Buffalo. And then when they got married, the section of Buffalo that they moved into was actually all white. But
Mhm.
you drop one black family in there, all the white families are moving out. So I don't know this all white neighborhood that my family moved into because I was just born 7 years later, and I only knew of this all black inner city working class neighborhood that soon
Mhm.
became, when I was a little bit older, became an area that was full of gang violence um, and um, and filled with drugs and things like that. So I grew up in a transitioning neighborhood. The whole
Okay.
time I was growing up, it was transitioning.
Mhm.
Now it's regentrifying now and becoming high rent, and because there's a medical campus next door to the neighborhood. And
Mhm.
so the neighborhood is starting to convert back. Although my father still lives in the same house that he moved into when he married my mom. He's been there for 60 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. What skills have you learned in a transitional neighborhood?
You become bilingual,
Okay.
and bilingual not in language in
Yes.
languages. You become bilingual in how do I survive in
Mm.
this all this completely black inner city neighborhood, that working class neighborhood. And what's funny is that I grew up always being told that I talked white. And
Okay.
so that was something that always stood out. And it's like you talk white, and so now you're in the middle of a fight because you talk white. and but you also learn how to talk to survive in the white
Mm.
public schools that were transitioning also. And so
Mhm.
that was the biggest thing, was trying learning how to and be authentic with it, because you couldn't be phony.
Yes. Yes.
You could
Yes.
not be phony and trying to talk hood. Instead of fighting one person, you probably would fight about five.
Uh-huh.
So you had to be authentic to who you were,
Right.
and so that was the biggest thing that I learned, was always stay who you are, and
Mhm.
no matter what, stand your ground, and don't let anybody just say anything to you, and then you have mad respect. And what's funny is that in the neighborhood I grew up in, and the high school I grew up at, that I went to, that's all my family now. I mean,
Right.
it's just all love. I mean, like all like whatever rivalries we had back in the day,
Yes.
they're done. I mean, like we see each other, and it's just all love. So
Was that so? The transition period, you're in a all white community. Growing
that was
up,
in school, yeah.
Exactly. So from high school to university and so on, was the transition the same or was it different?
No, Buffalo is a very segregated city, and it's still a segregated city.
Okay.
And so I was bused. Everybody from my neighborhood got bused, and so I went to a school that was a 45-minute bus ride away in
Hmm.
South Buffalo,
Okay.
and South Buffalo was like going back into the Confederate South.
Oh, wow.
Very racist, very uh, just extremely racist. They took the black people from all the poor black neighborhoods
Yes.
and put them into this school with all the poor white people, and
Oh,
said
wow.
none exists. And so that was a lot of race riots and fights and things like that, and so that was a lot of transition. And I was placed in the bottom performing of all the students, and so I got the worst classes.
Hmm.
And I came out of school. I came out of high school with virtually no skills. I remember when I first got to college, and they gave me a book and said, read the first four chapters of this book. It was Tuesday. Have the first four read by Thursday. I laughed. I thought it was a joke. I'm like, like, surely you're joking. That surely you talking about like you mean read the first 4 or 5 pages, not the
Right.
first 4 or 5 chapters. And so I ended up dropping out of college the first time I went.
Oh, wow. So you dropped out, but you went back because you have a lot of letters behind your name.
Yeah,
So you have to share that story.
okay. Well, I dropped out in '88, and I moved to Cleveland for a little while, and I moved back, and then I went back to school in '90, but and then I dealt with a lot of personal things. I mean, one the biggest being uh, my father's older brother, just by the weirdest coincidences. I mean, because I didn't know him well, but by the strangest coincidences, I got a phone call from his landlord, and I walked into his apartment and found him dead.
Oh,
And
wow.
I just could not psychologically. I couldn't deal with it, and I had to call my father. I had to call my cousin, whose father it was,
Hmm.
and had to actually be there um, as they all arrived to the house, because I had to just sit in the house with his body and wait for the police, the rescue squad, wait for my father, my uncles, and my aunt to come there, and then find my cousin, so they could claim the body and send the body on called the funeral home. So that was uh, um, I mean, I just couldn't handle it. But it was also the moment that I started writing. I just couldn't handle um, I couldn't handle everything that was going on. And
Right.
so I started writing poetry. And actually, that's when I started writing poetry, was in May of 1990. And before that, I never wrote anything. But that's what started me writing.
So you had an awakening moment in a very
Yeah.
unusual way.
But I didn't return back to school until 2012.
Hmm.
And I had suffered 2 brain strokes by that point, and so that ended my performance. I had become a slam poet and started traveling around the country and into Canada and into the Caribbean,
Hmm.
performing my poetry. And then I suffered 2 brain strokes. That I grew up with a stutter. I had a couple of speech impediments, and I used poetry to work out of those speech impediments, and
Yes.
then the strokes made the speech impediments return.
Okay.
And so it effectively ended me being a professional performer. And I went back to school in 2012.
Hmm.
I completed my bachelor's in 2015. I
Hmm.
went directly into my PhD program from my bachelor's,
Right.
and I got my master's in 2018, and my PhD I completed that in 2019.
Okay. So you had a challenge learning before, and
Yeah,
then you had an awakening moment,
yeah.
and then you just catapult from a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD. So
That's how I call being
if you
blessed.
could express, share, what was that like? Like this awakening, just you just didn't stop. So persons describe learning, an awakening like such as what you experienced, like food. You've just tasted and you just want more and more and more. Is that close, similar, or do you have a different spin on it?
Now, it's like that. What happened was, I always wanted to return to school, and it would just seem like something would happen that would prevent me from doing it.
Mm,
And my mother was a hard worker and she was a grinder.
mm,
And my mother actually went back to school when she left the South. She hadn't even finished high school,
mm.
and my mother went back to school after she had 5 children and 2 grandchildren. And she
Wow.
went to high school, and she entered a program where she got her high school diploma one year and her bachelor's the next year.
Oh, wow.
And then she later got her master's degree, because when she married my mother was a day's worker, which was a just a maid who did not spend the night. But my mom was a day's worker, and so seeing that type of grind from her, and like just the neighborhood that I grew up in, my mother worked with the gangs to
Right.
eliminate gang violence. She was a huge community activist and
Mm-hmm.
worked with all the politicians in the area to get them elected, to get people in positions that would change the neighborhood. And so seeing that type of grind. And then when I was 12, my father had a bad industrial accident that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he actually uh, died on the operating table, and they revived him. And seeing him fight back after that incident, it just I didn't know it, and it's not like I grew up saying I have this fighting spirit of my parents, but uh, but I realized that I did have the spirit of my parents and my
Mm-hmm.
grandfather. I talked about my grandfather being a single father,
Mm-hmm.
but what I didn't talk about was the fact that he only had use of one leg.
Oh, wow.
So he raised his 6 children and many of his nieces and nephews during the Great Depression. He was a farmer,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandfather was the son of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
His mother and father both became free when they were 20 years old,
Wow.
and he was 54 when my father was born, and
Mm-hmm.
so I just think that I got this thing from them that
Mm-hmm.
said, just keep grinding, keep trying,
Mm-hmm.
and because in that in between time, I had started my own magazine. I had started traveling. I had started writing plays, and
Mm-hmm.
then a true inspiration was when I met my wife.
Ah.
Because originally I just met her doing poetry, and she joined my group, and she was a hot poet. I had a group called the Njozi Poets, and then we quickly started dating, and then we quickly got. I suffered 2 strokes, and we got married. We started dating and got married within the year, and it was amazing because she was told by the doctor he may not last the year.
Right.
He might not last a year, and she chose to marry me, which was incredible to me.
Mm-hmm.
But then she told me her background of being a student at NYU,
Mm-hmm.
and during 9/11, and having to run from the towers as they collapsed,
Wow.
and being homeless for 2 weeks, and still having to attend classes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so when you hear stories like that, you say,
Yes.
I can do this.
Yes, you can.
I can do this. When people all around you, you hear all these ridiculous stories. I mean, my mother was 23 when she was widowed,
Right.
and my her first husband was killed, was stabbed. Right, my brothers were watching and saw him stabbed. My one brother was 5 years old. Another one was 8. They
Mm-hmm.
saw him stabbed,
Mm-hmm.
and then my mother ran outside. They went and told my mother into the house. Told my mother,
Mm-hmm.
"Daddy's cut." And
Mm-hmm.
she ran outside and saw the knife still sticking through his body.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, and he mumbled a few more words and he died. And so you're like, people who persevered through that, it's going to sound like I had a life of tragedy, but I learned from other people's tragedies.
Mm.
And then her mom found my grandfather lynched in
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi.
Right.
And they actually had to, and they found him before he was fully dead and was dragging him home. My grandmother and one of my uncles and a couple of my aunts were dragging
Mm-hmm.
him home. And as they were dragging him home, because they didn't have a car or a wagon or anything like that, he
Mm-hmm.
died on the time during the time that they were dragging him home. And
Wow.
and then later, my grandmother had two sons die within 3 days. One died of natural causes; he died of a heart attack, but the other one got shot to death and ran home, died in my grandmother's arms, and he was trying to gamble so they could get some money to go to the other one's funeral. And he
Right.
handed her the money that he won gambling. It was $3.
Oh, wow.
He got shot to death over $3.
Over three
And
dollars.
my grandmother told me that story, and then remarkably, we were sitting on the porch
Mm-hmm.
that my uncle had died on,
Mm-hmm.
and she told me this whole story.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, you hear stories like that. One, it makes you a writer.
Yes, yes, for
That makes
sure.
you a writer because you just have a wealth of stories,
Definitely.
and then it makes you say, "I can persevere through this."
Yes.
It's easy to use. You have these examples right there. It's not like you don't know anybody.
Right.
You just have examples all over the place of people who
Mhm.
persevered through the worst of things. And so, even with having a stroke, um, and it was a devastating stroke. It was right on my brainstem. Both strokes right on my brainstem, which, of course, a brainstem operates everything.
Yes.
Um, but when the doctor says you have a good chance of recovering, then you say,
Mhm.
well, then I'm going to recover. you know,
That's right. That's
you know,
right.
when he tells
Right.
you you have a good chance of recovery, you say, I'm going to recover.
Right. So you are you're prophetic. You actually are prophetic because when I listen to you express yourself, you're not just saying, you're believing, you're declaring it.
Oh, definitely.
And you know what is just so engaging about your story? As a therapist, I come across, and I mean, history is just a passion of mine. And I see the result of what is called intergenerational trauma as to where the cycle just continues of the brokenness and just being at a particular spot. But when I hear you share your story, I hear the opposite of the intergenerational breakthrough, overcome.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
I saw my mother overcome.
Yes.
Now, by the same token, I saw my brother get consumed.
Mm-hmm.
He never recovered from seeing his father stabbed to death.
Mm-hmm.
And so my brother was 16 years older than me, and so I saw the drug abuse. I saw his homelessness. I saw him do things that challenged the family in many ways, almost broke us.
Mm-hmm.
I had to. I remember watching the movie Jungle Fever, and the
Ah,
part of the story that grabbed me was not the interracial relationship; it was the relationship between the two brothers.
yes. Yes.
And between Flipper and Skeeter, and seeing Wesley Snipes going out and having to find his brother in some of the craziest of places.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that story because that was my story.
Okay.
I had to go and find my brother, and sometimes it was simple as taking food to him,
Oh, wow.
getting him fed, and then in 2001, actually right before 9/11, he finally died from his abuse. He abused heroin and he contracted AIDS, and
Okay.
he died of AIDS, and so I saw the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
That side was always there when I
Mm-hmm.
was growing up because, like I said, he's 16 years older than me.
Right.
Then he had a son when I was 1, and who started to walk down the same path of his father. And so I was, and I, for some reason, I have no idea why, felt that I was responsible for my nephew in some type of way, who was only a year younger. You're not supposed to put that much on your shoulders.
Right.
But I felt that I had to protect my nephew, and I had to be there for him, and then felt a sense of defeat that I was not able to help him. But it took years for me to understand that I'm a year older. Yeah, I don't have the skills. I was doing the same silliness that he was doing. How am I going to pull him out of, I had the same immature mind. So how was I going to pull him out of anything? I'm only a year older. So, but yeah, so the other side of it was right there, like to see all the time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you are now a poet. You are documenting everything that you have experienced, and you have traveled the world. And I know you were in Toronto. You got awarded with the Grand Slam. Is that what it's called?
No, it was, I performed in When Brothers Speak.
When Brothers Speak, okay.
What's funny is that my wife won the Toronto International Poetry Slam.
Oh,
she was the first woman to ever do it. So, and one of 2 women to do it.
What was it like the first time you went on stage? You have such rich history, such passion, and you have now composed it in writing. What was it like?
Well, the first time I was ever on stage, I was actually 12. And I performed a Langston Hughes poem. And so that was strange because, like I said, I grew up with a speech impediment. Mm-hmm. And also I had a very bad self-image. And I was doing the poem I Too by Langston Hughes, and the final words are, besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed, because I too am America. And I felt that I was so ugly.
Oh, wow.
And I struggled. I mean, the people who taught me the poem and taught me the delivery of the poem had to work with me to be able to say that line, they'll see how beautiful I am.
Wow.
Because I had been told I was ugly. For all those 12 years before that, I was told that I was ugly and felt that I was ugly. Most of it, a lot of it because of my dark skin. So that was the strangest thing, was working through that. And then years later, when I started doing my own work, it was strange because right before you about to hit the stage, actually it still happens, right before you hit the stage, you're wondering, who wants to hear the story? Nobody cared about my story. That's right before. I mean, like, you're cool, you practice, you're good. Mm-hmm. And then right before, like, they're about to call your name, especially something like When Brothers Speak, there's 700 people in the audience.
Right.
And they paid to see 6 poets.
Right.
And so it's not like you can hide behind anybody else. It's you, the mic, and 700 people. Wow. And then like you hear Dwayne Morgan. Oh yeah. Like, you hear them giving you your introduction, and you're like, they're not going to care. So next we have Ntare Ali Gault. They're not going to care. and then you have to walk. You have to immediately strip all that off. Walk out on that stage. Hey everybody, I'm a picture of confidence. I got this. They don't know that 2 seconds ago you were sweating. You were pacing, and you didn't know if anybody would care. And so then the first applause from the audience, you're like, oh, you're with me. Yeah. Okay. I can go and do these next 5 poems.
That's right.
Because they're with me. But before that, you're like, and you're thinking in your mind, like, which poems are they going to like? I have 20 poems memorized, ready to go. Which ones are they going to like? And then you have to be ready to deliver.
You have an archive of poems How do you know which poem to say at what, or you just go on the vibes of the audience? How do you know which poem to bring?
It's completely by the vibe of the audience, and
Ah,
I
okay.
always know what my first poem is going to be.
Okay.
And like that, like when I did When Brothers Speak, I knew that I wanted to talk about domestic violence,
Okay.
and I felt that that's not talked about enough in our
Mm-hmm.
community, and so I knew, especially from men, we hear it from women, but we don't
Yes.
hear it from men,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
um, and we don't hear men. Um, in my opinion, we don't hear men unless they saw their mother go through it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't hear men say, "This is whack," and
Mm-hmm.
I need to address this. And so
Yeah.
my sister worked at Attica Correctional Facility and the state prison, and she told me a story when she first started working there
Mm-hmm.
about a guy who had uh, uh, he was a teenager, had beaten his girlfriend when she tried to leave him. He ended up luring her to a building, and he raped her and threw her off the building and torched her body.
Wow.
And so I knew going into When Brothers Speak, before I even said hello,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that the first lines, the poem starts, he asked her, meet me at our spot. I knew that was the first thing I was going to say
Right.
before I said hello.
Mm-hmm.
And because the audience didn't know where I was going to go with this.
Yes.
And so then I was like, I take them on this trip with me. And then I could just see, I looked out in the audience, could just see them looking at me like, where is he going?
Yes.
And it was not a story that had any comedy in it. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't have it didn't have anything. So I really had to trust the words that I had written in the
Mm-hmm.
story that I was conveying. I had to trust that,
Right.
and I had to trust the audience
Mm-hmm.
that. And I was the first poet in the entire show.
Oh,
I had to trust
wow.
the audience to be there with me, and then I would send some like through some comedic poems and some eroticism and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that night also happened to be, I believe it was my grandmother's birthday, and my
Okay.
grandmother passed away in '93. And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew the last poem. So I knew the first poem and the last poem. I didn't know the middle. I didn't know what the middle ones would be, but I
Right.
knew the first and the last poem was going to be about domestic violence. The last one was going to be about my grandmother, and
Mm-hmm.
then the other three was I totally depended on them.
So you introduced the program, you followed through, and it ended. Now the audience applaud you. How did that make you feel?
Well, the last line of my poem
Yes.
is about when my grandmother died.
Okay.
So the audience was like there,
Mm-hmm.
but I was doing everything to keep from crying. So you know, I almost became a blubbering fool on the stage. So, because I have a tape of the performance, and the last couple of words, my
Mm-hmm.
voice is cracking, and I was doing everything to just get the last words out. So the audience is applauding. I only heard the applause when I
Mm-hmm.
got backstage, because
Really?
I was trying to get off the stage
Mm-hmm.
so that they wouldn't see me, because I broke down those curtains is an amazing thing. Like I said, as soon as I hit those curtains, I lost it.
Oh, wow.
Like as soon as I hit those curtains, I lost it. So
What was that emotion that you were releasing? You've done it. It was for your grandmother, or all the above.
I no, I felt like the name of the poem is Hands and Dreams of Big Mama,
Mm-hmm.
and I just heard her voice in my ear, and she had a very distinct voice, and I heard this voice in my ear, um, and that's what I was going through. Like, oh, geez, like, and the way she would just say, "Baby,"
Oh, that sounds like grandma.
I just heard that in her Mississippi, country accent. I
Yes.
just heard that baby come in my ear, and I was good. I was done.
Um,
So
That sounds like grandma. That's
Yeah, yeah.
amazing. Oh wow. Would you be interested to, yeah, would you freestyle? You know, your audience are waiting.
Okay. I've never been a good freestyler, so I'll give a little bit about the poem I was just talking about. Handsome Dreams of Big Mama.
Okay.
Big Mama had some beautiful hands. There are old, swollen, weathered hands. Her heart and veins seemed like branches of rivers flowing through her aching sore and fragile hands. Big Mama's hands never struck me, but with a gentle word of comfort, they would caress me. They never scolded me, and only on a few occasions they were able to hold me.
Mm,
Now, our mamas told us that we couldn't call their mama mama. So the
mhm.
grandkids named Essie Murdis Johnson Patrick Big Mama.
Ah,
She was the smallest in physical stature, but rose above us all in spiritual understanding.
yes.
With paint eyes and a grateful heart, she could ease the most tense moment with the slightest moan of a tune that only she knew. But I could sit back and listen and wait for the stories to follow. The stories were like water, and I was a seed, and I could feel myself grow. The lines were written all over her face and hands. Yes, those homemade iced tea making, chicken frying, breakfast for a king cooking hands. Oh
Oh,
man, Big Mama had some beautiful hands, child delivering hands, praying hands, Bible thumping, Jesus praising, 12 children nursing, never heard her cursing, white glove wearing hands.
mm.
Okay, I think.
Oh, wow. Is that how we do it? We do the snap, snap, crack. Is that
I always want to claps.
if there was a tweet or a text, I know they'll be doing this right now. That was amazing. You were
Thank
right
you.
on point. Oh wow. Listen, let's not remove this momentum. Now, you said earlier that you co-wrote with your wife.
Yes.
And there's a list of poems and plays now. Wildflower. Introduce us to that.
Wildflower is a play that I wrote about my mom, about her experiences before she left. Well, some of it's before she left Mississippi. My mom was a teenage mother back in the 40s, so that was extremely frowned upon. And she was married by the time she was 19. My grandfather was extremely abusive to her, well, to pretty much all of his children. And so she eventually left, and she got married, and she married an abusive man.
Mm.
And but she stuck with him, and until, like I say, he was killed, and he was killed by my aunt's first husband. So he was killed by his brother-in-law, who was his best friend.
Right.
So I wrote that story, which is her story, and I was talking to her, and in fact, I was headed to the hospital. She was in the hospital. I was headed to the hospital to get some more information from her about when they met and things like that. She had told me the story 1,000 times, but now I want to capture it. But instead of getting that story, the hospital called me and said, "You need to contact your whole family because pretty much we're losing her."
Right.
And so instead of being able to talk to her, I got to the hospital the first time they were reviving her,
Mm-hmm.
and she slipped, and they revived her 2 more times. When I finally said to my father, "We got to stop doing this, and we got to let her go." And then I had to talk to my siblings and the ones who were there and say, it's time to let her go. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was and so then the play, in many ways, was cathartic for me
Mm-hmm.
because I was losing it losing my mother, I was losing it, and I knew no better storyteller than her. So, even that poem, Hands and Dreams of Big Mama, that was her mother. And a lot of that story I got from her. And so, so she never was able to hear it or anything like that, but she was able to hear poems because in Ain't She Brave that I co-wrote with my wife, I put stories about my mother in it. And Ain't She Brave is essentially a story of Black women and their history in America. And so it starts with the contemporary Black woman and starts traversing back to the slave ship. And so it's so when you finally see the horrors that she dealt with on the slave ship, and the last image is that the Black woman's husband is thrown overboard because he's sick, he dies, he's thrown overboard, and she has to say goodbye to him. And now she has to face the horror of America by herself.
Right.
And which is so symbolic of so many things about Black women.
Yes.
But we've seen already the horrors that she's going to face because we've been traversing back. So it's not like, oh, what's she going to face? We've seen it. And so that's Ain't She Brave. And it includes some of my wife's story about 9/11. It includes my mom's story, which my mom was shocked when she saw the play because she didn't know that I included so much of her story in there. So after the play, my mother was like, wow, I had an experience just like that. I remember when I was a day's worker. I was like, yeah, because it was your story. Yeah, but so and then the woman, she would always make me get on my knees when I was like, just like in the play, right? She's like, yeah, because it was your story. So it took a while for my mother to finally understand it was you. But that play was remarkable because we did it in New York, and we had an amazing cast of Broadway and off-Broadway actors doing it. And at any given time, I can turn the TV or go to a movie and see the actors who were in the play. Playing these parts, and I still hear their voices, and whatever the character they're playing in this TV show, I don't even hear that voice. I hear the voice when they were in my play.
Oh, wow! Do you have a website or a social media page that there's a link to your work, your plays, your poems, or perhaps even have you come and speak? Well, perhaps virtually now in COVID, but
yeah. I can be contacted through Facebook. My Facebook page is my name, Ntare Ali Gault, or Instagram, Ntare 7755, and they can go to YouTube if they want to see any of my performances. I have a number of my performances and clips of Ain't She Brave on there. And then my wife and I actually we had a podcast. It's on hiatus right now called Chai and Gray, Date Night with the Doctors.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, she has her PhD also.
Yes, congratulations.
And she's a professor at the University of Arizona. And so, but we talk about, what's funny, we don't talk about things like that. We talk about we talk about like things that happen on TV, the media. It started getting really heavy because while we were doing it, we started dealing with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. We dealt with Breonna Taylor, and so we took a hiatus and said, like, okay, when semester's over, we'll pick it back up and do 10 more episodes.
Wow! Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Here's the question that I know you're going to answer this with flying colors. You're going to hear your mother's voice. You're going to hear your grandmother's voice.
Do you know how many tears I've fought throughout this interview? Okay, ask your question. But I'm telling you, I'm fighting some tears.
I'm pretty sure you're going to hear your wife's voice as well.
Okay.
What would you tell your younger self where you are now and looking at yourself then, what would you say? Oh, look at your body language. It's like, mommy.
My younger self, I would. So many times I wanted to give up, and what's funny, one of the biggest times I wanted to give up was the person who actually saved me. That time was my goddaughter. She was like about 12 at the time, and but I was raising her like she was my own daughter, and she happened to call me up, and what she didn't know was that I had 3 consecutive phone calls. I didn't even hang up the phone. I would like just say like, okay, and go to the next call. Another call would be coming in. I had 3 consecutive phone calls saying that I had lost grants.
Okay.
And it totaled $60,000 in grants by the time I finally was getting off the phone. And I had lost $60,000 in one felt swoop. And I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to eat? And then she called and was talking about it was some school project that she had and that she was going to fail it. And I was like, wow. So that's her biggest problem right now. And she was crying on the phone.
Right.
And so the advice I would give to my younger self is to not give up. And that's what I try to tell my students now. Whatever you're going through now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's not going to get worse. Yeah. But I'm also going to tell you that if you keep yourself in the fight, it will get better.
It will get better.
Yeah, and I mean, and I don't think I've said it really too much in this interview, but the power of prayer.
You hit it.
The power of prayer, because I had to lean on that, and not just prayer, meditation. Sometimes I will close myself up in the room, and I have a playlist of praise and worship songs, and I will sit back and listen to those 8 hours.
Wow, that sounds about normal.
Yeah, just 8 hours, and I will have my own praise and worship here in my office or in the house. My daughter's only 4, but she's learning that already. My daughter already has learned how to start praying, and that's so it gets better. You'll be able to, whatever happens, you'll be able to get through it. Yeah, that's what I tell my younger self.
And what final word would you tell your audience? Would you tell your future self?
You don't have to rush everything. That's something that I used to do also too. Like, because so often as a black man, especially as a black man who grew up in the inner city, I've dealt with gang violence. I've been, I almost lost my life. I was literally jumped by 30 guys at one time. I was 22 and had to fight my way out of it. I've been in catastrophic car accidents, and so I used to rush everything, and some of it, things would not be ready to hit the stage. It would not be complete, but I would rush it because I was like, because it got to be done. Because if I die, I don't want to die and it's in this shape. And like I didn't complete it, and so I would rush everything. Take your time, and also my mother's family had a bad history of black men not living past like the age of 50 or so. And so, and still kind of deal with that, but yeah, you don't have to rush everything. Take your time, do it right.
Do it right.
Yeah.
That sounds like a classic song right there.
Oh, it is. Yeah, that's a band. So take your time, do it right.
Do it right. Yeah. Oh wow, you have ended it on a powerful note. We want to say thank you so very much.
This was a pleasure.
Oh, I see all the prompts coming up. I'm getting all the texts, and I just can't imagine. You really had us engaged. Thank you so very much. For the most important thing that you offer anyone is your time. And to you, we want to say thank you. To our guests, we want to say thank you. Again, your time is the most important thing you can ever offer. And we thank you so very much for engaging with us in another episode to honor another distinguished gentleman to as we hear his expression on the Now Talk Show. The Now Talk Show is sponsored by the Alabaster Wellness Clinic, where we specialize in clinical counseling, integrative medicine, and trichology. Now, should you know of another distinguished gentleman, we invite you to reach out to us, to email us. I mean, the information is at the bottom of the screen at the Now Talk Show. Dr. N Wong at gmail.com. We're more than happy to schedule another distinguished gentleman to share his story. This is a platform for men. We believe, and I mean, this is just the law of life. When a man speaks, it shapes the world. And that's what this platform is for you to share your story and know that you're paying it forward to shape the world for the next generation. You know, when you express yourself as a man, it's healing for other men. And as a woman, it teaches us how to listen, how to love you, and listen. Just keep reshaping and remolding. So, again, thank you so very much for listening to us, for engaging on another episode of the Now Talk Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nadine Wong. Thank you and good night. Woo, I love it.
Okay. Well, I think this is actually a beautiful platform. This is an excellent platform to have. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
don't get a chance to you don't get a chance to talk about yourself that much and your
Oh, and we need more
experiences.
of that.
Yeah, yeah.
We
So
need more of when men speak. We really do need more of that, and it's important that you feel safe to express that, because when we talk about slavery, we touched a bit of that. We talk about slavery. Black men never had the opportunity; they were muted. And if you go back to biblical days, in the beginning, God said, and everything He said, it was formed, it was shaped, and it continued to follow through and follow through. So here we are, right? So
yes.
that's what it is. So again, thank you again for joining, and stay tuned to, to our conversation after. Have a good evening. Have a good morning. Thank you and good night.
Okay.